All right, it looks like everyone has joined from the waiting room for the most part, so we'll get started here. It's 12:01. Just want to say thanks everyone for joining us for this joint session between the APA Chicago Metro section and Illinois ASLA. We try to do at least one event as kind of partners each year, and this year we're fortunate enough to be able to do a couple. This one on community lighting standards, designing and planning for dark skies. So I'm Brandon Nolan. I'm chairman of APA Chicago Metro section. Really happy to be partnering once again with ASLA. We've got a great panel. I'm going to go ahead and share a screen here. And just a reminder for everyone joining us, and Paula, I don't know if you can do this for us, but just mute yourself if you are joining the group. So I'll go ahead and share a screen now. All right, so welcome again, and beautiful picture here, and we're going to be talking about dark skies. If you're here for the knitting webinar, that's 2 Zoom rooms over. That joke always lands on this platform. So just a quick welcome from us, and then we'll get rolling. We've got a great panel of speakers with us today. We've got Drew Carhart, who's the executive board member for the Illinois Coalition for Responsible Outdoor Lighting, or ICROL. Vijay Gadde with Village of Homer Glen, as Director of Planning and Zoning there. Community lighting standards will also be talked about by Drew Tedford with Midwest Regional Sales Manager for Sternberg Lighting. And then we've got Rick Utting rounding out the group, Director of Strategic Initiatives for Landscape Forums. And so we're really hoping to get kind of a collective discussion both from the planning side as well as the design side of things regarding community lighting and standards here. So really appreciate everyone's time. We're going to try to keep this to about an hour. Might go a little bit longer than that, but we've got presentations from each of the speakers, and then we're going to do Q&A at the end. Please use the chat window and functionality to do Q&A. As we're going through and presenting, if you have a question for Drew or a question for Vijay as we're going through their presentations, just put it in the chat. We'll come back to it at the very end and have some good conversation about the different questions people have. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Drew. You can go ahead and start screen share on your end and take over.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I was asked to give a kind of an introductory tidbit about the whole concept of the dark sky communities thing. And my organization, we have actually been asked to help with a number of communities in Illinois addressing outdoor lighting issues. And so what I'm going to be talking about is kind of based on experience from there. So to start out with, I think the major concept to get across is during the last—
This is one credit.
During the last third of the 20th century, there was a huge explosion in the amount of outdoor lighting we used in this country and around the world. Basically, it wasn't a change in practice as much as a change in technology, that our lights just got a lot brighter. And this ended up having a lot of environmental effects. And the first group to really notice that as it was happening was the astronomy community. And that led to the foundation of the forming of the International Dark Sky Association in the late 1980s. Was an astronomy-based group. The focus was right what it says in its name, dark skies. So the IDA went on to start the, excuse me, locked my slide up here, to start the Dark Sky Community Program in 2001, with Flagstaff, Arizona being the first international dark sky community. And now there are currently 28 such communities that have earned that status by fulfilling the IDA's requirements for, basically for lighting regulation. And there's also their Dark Sky Parks program and other recognitions. But what we found, especially in Illinois, but I think it's probably true everywhere, is that this issue has grown beyond the concept of, quote, dark skies. It's kind of widened into the idea of light pollution in general. And dark skies isn't the only issue that communities are trying to address. What we have found in our group is that we can kind of winnow these down, all the different concerns people have, into 5 basic groups. And what we found is that each community tends to have its own focus. It may just be one of the concerns, one of the 5 concerns. It may be all of them in different ratios, but again, it's broadened beyond dark skies for certain when we talk about outdoor lighting and actual application in communities. The first one of the 5 I'll list as, they're not in any particular order, but I've got listed as energy waste here. And it's really pretty simple. It takes gigawatts of electricity to light up the sky over the United States to the level we do every night. And so whether people are looking from the dollar cost as taxpayers to pay for the municipal parts of that, or the environmental costs of burning that much energy to create the bright skies and the bright everything else that we've got. This is a definite issue that people are seeing out there. The second would be safety and security. And as a simple summary there, I hope everybody who understands lighting appreciates that there's good lighting and there's bad lighting. And good lighting is helpful. It helps us be active at night, helps us be safe, helps us be secure. But bad lighting is the opposite. It makes things worse. Basically, glare is horrible. So that's my good short summary there. Ecology has become a big aspect too. Again, in some areas more than others. The dead birds are from slamming into lit office buildings at night, basically. But from a conservation point of view, from a natural conservation point of view, we know that man-made light affects all living things, and oftentimes in bad ways and not good ways. So there's that environmental issue. And then there's the health concerns issue. Just in the past 20 years, science has really discovered how very light sensitive human beings are. We didn't used to think that, but it turns out that we are extremely light sensitive. So this is a concern that people have about whether the nighttime environment should always be flooded with light. And dark skies is still on the list as number 5 here. Again, in some places it would be at the top of the list. If you were in Arizona or New Mexico, where there are professional astronomical observatories, it might be number 1. But for people even in urban areas, it may not seem like an issue that's obvious, but people are really understanding that no one can see the stars anymore. We have whole generations of children growing up without ever seeing the stars in the sky. And there might well be long-term effects for our society in taking away that awareness of the universe out there. Just like we can boil down these 5 basic groups of concerns here, I can boil down to 5 basic areas that we end up talking about with communities as far as actually looking at lighting practices and lighting regulation. So in addressing the issues, there's the simple concept of using the minimum effective amount of illumination that you need for a given activity in a given area. The second would be only illuminating the area of activity. In other words, this gets into the trespass issue. You need light here, but you don't necessarily need it next door. You don't necessarily need it in the sky or in the forest preserve or wherever. So keep the light where it's needed. The third being only lighting during the hours of activity. This basically turn off the lights when you leave the room concept. The fourth being looking at the actual efficiency of your luminaires. This is obviously impacts the energy waste issue considerably. I think we should all know that there are extremely inefficient luminaires still out there, and still better ones. Ooh, I'm losing my sky. The sun's going away. Anyway, the luminary efficiency also addresses trespass, because if a lot of light from your luminaire is going where it's not needed, that's wasted energy there. And then the fifth one would be that the color of light matters. We're discovering this more and more in everything from safety and security, and that the color of light affects how much glare response we have to our eyes. Through the ecology, through the health, through the dark skies, color makes a big difference. So that's an overview from my point of view of what the basic issue is, the group of issues are from the community point of view. So I'll turn it over to Vijay to talk about Homer Glen in particular.
So just to give you a little introduction, kind of Drew kind of explained the philosophy behind the IDA, the International Dark Sky Community. Homer Glen was recognized and designated in 2001, followed by Beverly Shores, Indiana, and more recently, Village of Hawthorne Woods in the Chicago area. So we're the first in the state of Illinois, fourth in the world to have this designation. So the village does host events such as stargazing events to preserve the night sky and preserve and promote the night sky philosophy here. Moving on to the next one. So this is kind of the outline of all our outdoor lighting standards. I'm going to briefly touch on each one of them and kind of explain some of the implementation challenges we had in the past 4 years or so since I've been with Homer Glen. So the lighting standards apply to all zoning lots in the community, and there are criteria required for compliance. And this is one of the issues we faced in the past few years or so. So if you have a shopping center replacing more than 25% of their light fixtures or poles, they're required to comply with the code. So we had issues with several shopping centers replacing their parking lot lights and the building mounted lights, not realizing Homer Glen is a dark sky community. They need the village review and approval prior to doing it. They were primarily driven by the contractor showing them energy, less energy consumption, reduced maintenance costs, and so on. So in one situation, they actually replaced and they realized it's too expensive to go back and replace again. They kind of, gave us a cost like, $30,000 to replace all the light standards. So they actually try to get a variance, after the fact. And our code does not allow after the fact variances. So that didn't go too far. In the end, they had to go back and replace all the light fixtures conforming to the code. So the chief building official is the implementing authority. He does the inspections, has the, kind of follows up with all the applicants. Planning staff is more involved in the code updates and the dealing with the variances and appeals to the code. So one of the light standards we have is the gross emission of light should not, for non-residential properties, should not exceed 1,000 lumens per net acre. And a few years ago, I know the village's environment committee and staff discussed potential update to the code, including the transition to LED technology. And that hasn't happened yet, but if you do it, the gross emission could be reduced to 70,000 lumens through enhanced visibility with the new technology versus 100,000 lumens we have currently. So the code also talks about how much light they can have under the gas station canopies. So it cannot exceed 30-foot candles. And we had pushback from several gas stations because they're used to brighter lighting under the canopy, especially in the surrounding communities. They always tend to push towards like 50-foot candles, which the code does not allow. So just one of the challenges in implementing the code. And the code also has standards, what the maximum inclination is for uplighting. It varies from 45 to 60 degrees. And this is for non-commercial properties, and the lighting should be shielded, and there should be some sort of beam angle control so they're angled properly with that inclination. The light trespass is limited at the property line, and also after the close of business, the overall lighting is supposed to be turned down to 25% of the total light output from the outdoor lighting. So we had an issue with the bank ATM lighting. They said by state statute, they have a minimum required brightness level they had to comply with. So we had to exempt them, even though it's not exempted in our code. The state statute requires certain levels of brightness. So this is one of the village standard for street lighting. It's very decorative, and the height is limited to 25 feet for commercial properties. A lot of our shopping centers, they have older lights at 30 feet in height. And we had an issue with Aldi recently, about 2 years ago, when they were upgrading the building and the parking lot. They were replacing or upgrading 4 of their lights. And in order to comply with the code, they had to, shorten the pole height from 30 to 25. They could have, appealed to the village board. Instead, they chose to, spend a few $1,000s and, just downsize the light poles. So this is a very hot topic right now in the village. The village board is actually going to vote on this issue of the color temperature for street lighting tomorrow night. And what, the village, all the street lights, majority of the street lights have 70 watt HPS high pressure sodium lights. And the code is a little confusing as to what's an appropriate replacement, whether it's a PC amber LED lighting or 2200K or 3000K. So just FYI, the ComEd Energy Efficiency Program reimburses only for 3000K LED lighting. So that program kind of triggered this discussion. And as I said, the village board is going to make the choice tomorrow night at the board meeting. As typical with all our codes, we have a list of prohibited outdoor lighting, no laser light source, no flickering lights, no upward directed lighting, and architecture lighting is kind of limited. No searchlights, and no neon lights, and so on. And there's a list of exempt outdoor lighting, and this is primarily for safety of swimming pools or lighting required by village, county, or federal authorities for single-purpose emergency egress lighting, or holiday decorations as a temporary lighting. And and it goes on. So there's a list of exempted outdoor lighting. The code also has procedural requirements and also process for administrative variance. And there's certain things that we cannot vary administratively. They're spelled out clearly. That includes the light source above 3000K and exceeding the required light levels at the property line, and not fully shielded light fixtures. And you can see the little graphic, not fully shielded light fixtures. Exceeding the height requirement, as I mentioned with the Aldi parking lot as an example, and seeking after the fact variance request or to correct a zoning violation as it happened with one of our shopping centers. And the code also has a procedure for variances, which has to go through a plan commission and village board process, and also has penalties for violations, which is implemented by our building staff, and kind of ends with all the definitions of the terms used in the code. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll be waiting for a Q&A after the next speaker. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to, first of all, thanks to the organizers, APA and ASLA, and thank you to the co-presenters. It's been fun getting to know you guys over the last week and a half or so. And thanks to everyone who has signed up and joined us today. My name is Drew Tedford. I work for Sternberg Lighting. I was a landscape architect by trade for about 12 years before I became a lighting nerd, and I've been on the lighting side since about 2007. And my one of my biggest passions with lighting is definitely light pollution, and so some of the topics I'm going to discuss today, and making sure everybody can see my screen. Yep. So 4 topics. Now, each one of these topics really could be drilled down for an hour presentation on their own, but I'll keep it short so that all the other presenters can speak as well. But I want to chat about using the the IDA guidelines and the IES guidelines as a critical part of our design criteria, but not the rule. I mean, it's something that we should consider, but sometimes a good design, we'll have to flex the rules a little bit to get. It's the classic argument, form and function. So as far as form, when we're choosing fixture styles, obviously different types of fixture styles will affect the performance and where the light's being distributed on your site. In particular, my company makes more of a decorative style lighting, and so and sometimes it's kind of hard to control the distribution if it's a task light or a marker light on the edge of a pathway or patio or something. But it's still very important. So we gotta make sure when we're looking at the style that we're blending into the character of the site, and as well, and we're picking a fixture that is sensitive to light distribution, particularly on adjacent properties, because as Drew Carhart mentioned, light pollution is not only upward, it's outward. So you want to, and then there's glare. So balancing performance with visual comfort. That's another word I use for glare. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then as manufacturers, our product engineers that's their biggest challenge. Our designers are, trying to keep the options for you as designers to have plenty of options available for your site aesthetically, and balancing that with being able to have the proper features to get the best performance and when it comes to light pollution. So the first topic, when we're incorporating these guidelines into design, I like to take my design approach into a three-pronged, three-step process. And when you're talking about lighting design, you have to consider your application, your site applications, number one. I mean, there's a lot of different applications have different thresholds for light pollution. I mean, if it's in an urban area, you might have a little bit more leniency, whereas if you're in a residential area or a natural park area or down in Tucson, Arizona, or where there's observatories, and you're going to have a lot more strict thresholds on light pollution. So, understanding your site application will dictate your fixture selection. And then when you get into fixture selections, there's hundreds of manufacturers out there, thousands of manufacturers out there, and there's basically 2 categories of your, when you get into exterior lighting, it's traditional style versus your more contemporary or modern styles. And not that any one or the other has an advantage or disadvantage, it's really but in general terms, traditional styles are a little bit harder to control the light distribution versus just because of the lensing and some of the detailed designs that's involved in those fixtures. And I'll show you some examples shortly. And then, of course, the last part of the design process is lighting performance. And as designers, we want to maintain health and safety. Number one, we want our sites to be comfortable and safe, and then all that's achieved through proper spacing of the fixture layout, and then creating light uniformity. So you don't want a lot of hot spots, you don't want a lot of dark spots. You got to kind of find that middle ground, and all that plays into light pollution, and because it's all part of the same game. What's cool about LED over the last 10 years is it's since it is a solid state platform, it's given us as manufacturers and engineers a platform to introduce more control and integrating your lighting with smarter control systems. So we call that adaptive control. So the lights don't have to be on from dusk to dawn anymore at 100%. So at non-peak hours, you could drop your lighting down to a 10% or a 25%. You're probably starting to see this in a lot of parks and pathways. If they have motion sensors, as a pedestrian walks by, the lights will brighten up, and then 5 minutes later, 2 minutes later, whatever the program is set, the lights will dim back down. So so adaptive control and integrating our LED fixtures into larger control systems has been a huge advantage of LED. But on the same token, on the flip side, actually, the LED is much more intense. So there's glare, and we'll talk a bit about that as well. So there's advantages and disadvantages. So here's a few samplings of different, fixture styles that are out there. And really, I mean, you can just pick, I mean, there are just so many different fixture styles to choose from modern to classical, and the easiest way to achieve dark sky is to make sure your fixtures have your light source mounted in the roof and aimed downward, and that's really going to protect most of your night sky. But sometimes when you have fixtures that have curved lenses, that's going to reflect light upwards. That's why I said earlier, when you have a historic style fixture, it's kind of harder to protect that night sky. You'll be able to limit most of the uplight, but there's still going to be some that goes up. But even with these historic styles nowadays, LED has given us the ability with optics, real detailed and precise optics, where you can literally stop a beam of light at the edge of a property, and HID and high pressure sodium wasn't able to do that. So that's a really cool advantage of LEDs, being able to really highly direct that light output. So distribution types is really important. Again, we talked about hot spots, and you could do symmetrical lighting if you need to get, but if you have more of a task and you want to highlight just a pathway. So this slide just kind of shows examples of all the different distribution types, but you want to be cognizant of that when you're doing your layouts. As designers and manufacturers, and engineers, we're not only concerned with the light being emitted from the source, but also how it's reflecting off the surface of the target illumination target. So you get you got to be cognizant of the material that the light is being projected on, because if it has a high reflectance, that's going to create glare and hot spots as well. So it's not just the luminaire, and whereas a lot of the specification sheets that you'll see from manufacturers, they're specific to the fixture itself, but we've got to take in consideration as designers of the surrounding surface. So for instance, different types of pavement types, concrete versus asphalt, is going to reflect different. Weather, rain, obviously a wet sidewalk or street is going to reflect light and create hot spots. Snow, obviously real super bright white, is going to reflect light. Another thing to be cognizant of, if you're in a high strict zone of zero uplight, and we're projecting all the light from the luminaire down into these narrow angles, sometimes you're losing some of that what we call vertical luminance, and that could create a hazardous situation. So not that it's good or bad, it's just something to be aware of in your design to balance the downlight and the vertical lumens and all that fun stuff. And then here's a few examples of some night sky friendly applications, some modern fixtures where all the light's being directed downward. And then of course, you get into the more historical stuff, and maybe this is bad for light pollution, but it's good for a social gathering, except for the glare. But another aspect of control is the dimming capabilities. Now we could dim these down, and so it's just good to be aware of all that stuff. Also, glare reduction. If you look into some of these fixtures, you can see there's implements being incorporated to block light in a particular direction. You can kind of see these are all glare shields. Another way to do it is through frosted lenses. So a lot of manufacturers offer different levels of frosted lensing to help reduce glare. But just be aware that if you're adding frosted lenses, it might affect the distribution and the performance or the output a little bit. So we want to be aware of that as designers. Here's a cool example of a light distribution. You can see how the light is kind of terminated backwards. So there's no backlight. There's a lot of forward throw, but there's no backlight. So Another, we talk about international dark sky, but there's also the IES classification system, and they use bug, backlight, uplight, and glare, BUG, and these are all the different zones that we measure light as designers, and we want to be cognizant of all these zones, and really you want to try to stay down in the 90 degrees or lower to protect the night sky. But if you don't want to light pollution on adjacent property, you want to try to make sure you get more forward throw and no back throw. So that's just a slide, and each one of these zones have different metrics to tell you where you're at. And again, bug ratings and IDA, that's another hour-long class, but this is a good overview just to kind of see what it's all about. And again, manufacturers, we have one of the highest responsibilities to make sure you as designers and engineers have plenty of options to apply your lighting in your site, whether it's an urban or rural or parks or roadways, pathways, or whatever. And so with that, we're holding questions to the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Rick with Landscape Forums. Thank you very much, everyone.
So what is lighting for outdoor pedestrian spaces? LOPS is an IES committee. IES is the Illuminating Engineering Society that generates the recommended, lighting guidelines and practices for all the different applications. Outdoor lighting has been a void for IES guidelines. So the committee was started about 5 years ago to explain how should one light the outdoor space when people are involved. The committee was stacked with some incredibly talented lighting designers, researchers for the Department of Energy, researchers from the University of Sheffield in England, etc., manufacturers alike. And this picture is typical of what we did over the 5 years. We went to outdoor spaces and we looked and we measured and we discussed what it was that made spaces successful. So in the next 10 minutes, I want to basically explain why lighting in outdoor pedestrian spaces matters, what outdoor space might look like beyond this year, 2020. I'm going to give you a really cool tool. You can take notes as fast as you can, but basically it's going to be how to do lighting design beyond just foot candles, and sort of a process for that. We've got some new exterior tables that will be out in January timeframe. And then again, we can handle any Q&A after that. So do we need lighting at night? That's a very fair question. And, full moonlight actually does produce measurable light that we can all see by your body, your eye will adapt to a light level. So this is a valid question. I think what I'm going to try and do is explain to you why we probably do need some light at night. So first of all, the average maintenance schedule for lighting equipment has been about 20 years. If you think of this as the year 2020, much of the infrastructure was put in close to 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, we didn't have smartphones and it was a very different way to live. Fast forward to today, people are very mobile, unless you're in quarantine. So people get out, they move around. Outdoor space is used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's really just a decade ago that the world's urban population exceeded the world's rural population. People were moving into cities. Outdoor space was being designed to accommodate growing populations. And here today, we have to think about how to design those spaces for healthy human interaction. Light sources have changed. Drew touched on it, but we're beyond the HID days now. We're into LEDs. Lights LED lights can be hidden and come from all kinds of different places. You could get light coming from architecture. It can come from light poles. It can come from stairs, handrails. You know, urban renewal is cleaning up unwanted spaces. There's light showing up in furniture now, tables. And ultimately, you know, hospitality is really getting people outdoors for a healthier experience and a social connection and a connection with the environment. So in summary, LOPS, lighting for outdoor pedestrian spaces, is important because outdoor space is become more important. So why do we light? If you look at the data, vehicles travel more than they used to, but yet their accident rates are down. That's vehicles. As far as people are concerned, pedestrian deaths are up 35% in about the last decade, and many of those are conflicts with things in the outdoor space, like moving vehicles. So that's why it matters. What's a pedestrian? Well, sometimes you're on foot, sometimes you're on a bike, sometimes you're on a scooter or a skateboard, sometimes you're walking, sometimes you're running. It's a very complex situation to be a pedestrian, and you need to see things that are different than what a motorist needs to see, and vice versa. So what is it that people need? People need to orient and wayfind. They are probably going somewhere. And do they understand their surroundings and how to get from point A to point B? How do they feel emotionally? This is a new term that our committee has introduced. It's called reassurance. It's not security. We're not guaranteeing your safety. We're saying, based on what you see, do you feel confident in the space enough to engage with it? Are you going to navigate, and are you going to start to move? If you do, then we need to provide or help provide some physical safety, stairways, trips and falls, maybe in this particular case, a crosswalk across a street, not only so that you can see, but you can be seen. And then finally, this is the part that lighting designers really enjoy, and that's creating an atmosphere, an emotional response, and maybe getting from you in a level of enjoyment. What we concluded is that you can't get to that without passing through all the previous steps. So this is the chart I wanted to show you. This is what appears in one of the new IES documents. It's called LP2, which is a lighting practice, and it's for quality lighting design in outdoor spaces. It is live on the new IES library, and it's basically a hierarchy of outdoor lighting design. And here's where the summary of everything you've heard earlier today comes in. It basically says the first thing you need to do is understand your community and the zonal planning. After that, we think it's good lighting design to highlight the things that create a hierarchy and a context of the scene. Very typical that your eye goes where the light is. So it's just sort of a trick of, you know, maybe you want to add light to building entrances and things that you want to attract people to. After those two things, then help people orient, wayfind, make them feel reassured, provide physical safety against hazards, create an atmosphere and enjoyment. If you can follow these steps in outdoor lighting, you can achieve the goals, and we believe you can do it in a responsible way for the environment. So, for example, when you start out with zonal lighting, this is an IES term, but lighting zone 0 means really no electric light. And then there's lighting zone 1, 2, 3, and 4. Lighting zone 4 is where there's a lot of light. Okay, when you're doing community planning, we already think about residential, commercial, industrial. Many cities, municipalities need to be thinking about their lighting zones. Why? Well, it's really important that you be able to transition from a low lighting area to a high lighting area over an appropriate amount of time. But you also want to create sort of a theme in architecture, a theme in lighting. You should have some common light color, intensity, understand the tasks that are happening in those different zones, and it should really be planned at the community level. So lighting zones, first thing you need to really do. We talked about the lighting zone right there. Here's just some visual aids of, you know, it's not the best idea to try and have 4 lighting zones in 4 blocks. That's, you know, just not realistic. So what is the identity of your community, and what does it want to be? Go back to the pyramid and say, after you've got that understanding of the community plan, hierarchy and context is, in the upper photo, you can see an image during the day, and no one will argue that you understand it, right? You understand it's a park, there's buildings, there's landscape. Look at the picture below that at night. You understand the exact same thing. There's nothing in those 2 images that you don't understand. That's quality lighting design right there, that you've created this understanding as well at night as you did during the day. The trick is you don't want to use a lot of light to do that. So that's what we're going to kind of show you how to do. That's a trick. Orientation and wayfinding, here's a couple paths. There's a couple tricks in this picture. One is there's a very logical, consistent light pattern that helps your brain think about the pathway. There's some vertical light on not only the wall, giving you some understanding of egress points and exits, but you can also see monuments and landmarks, a sculpture or an arch or something that helps you navigate and wayfind. Reassurance, it's all about threat assessment. Who else is out there with you? What's their posture? And when are you going to encounter them? And if need be, do you understand how to go from point A to point B and what you're going to do? So vertical light is important in this particular case. And then the object safety, like I said, stairs, changes in elevation, anything that might be a moving object. Those are all potential threats that need to be illuminated. Glare, as was mentioned, is a detractor from vision. This can really hurt your vision. Your eye has an adaptation range. Like I said, under full moonlight only, you'll adapt, you'll see well. The minute you put a bright light in your eye, your adaptation level is going to go up, and your eye can't resolve the difference between the darkest thing and the brightest thing. So the minute we start lighting, there's a vicious trend to overlight, and we need to help break that cycle. So here's a case study where we did that. This is Denver's 16th Street Mall. The image on the left using HDR imaging shows that there's more light in that image than the one on the right. And here's the image on the left. So this is what Denver's 16th Street Mall looked like. That light was producing the reds and the yellows and the oranges in the left photo. Here's what the mall looks like today. So before and after. And this was done with about 5 times less light. So how did you do that? Well, you used a broader spectrum light that has more of the visible spectrum. You can see that the tree canopy is lit, and you could say, well, that's uplight, that's bad. Well, not if it's hitting its target, and not if you control that uplight. So in the wintertime, when the leaves fall, you shut it off. So there's a lot of great vertical light in this image. There's a good spectrum of light. The uniformity is improved, so the dark spots are kind of gone. So you can improve lighting for people to feel more reassured, physically safe, and create an atmosphere using less light. That's the summary, and that's quality lighting design. So ultimately, we want to create those atmospheres and enjoyment. Color is a great tool to be able to do that. As I mentioned, this is all fresh in the new IES standard called LP2, which is an overview. The table, which provides the luminance values, will be available in January. That's going to be called RP43. The table is very unique in that for the first time ever, within the lighting zones, we're providing a minimum and maximum. So we're giving the lighting designer a tool. They don't have to hit a target. They can be within the target. We're going to talk about vertical illuminance. We're going to talk about that optical control that Drew was mentioning. All manufacturers have their lights in a laboratory and they can produce that bug rating. So we know what the G rating is. We know what the U rating is based on your application. This on the screen, this is a building entrance. Based on that building entrance and that lighting zone, you should put that amount of light on the ground, that amount of light on a vertical facade using a fixture that has a rating and a up light rating of that. Just remember, uplight isn't just pointing it in the sky, it's reflected as well. So by lowering light levels, we're actually helping the dark sky. And then also spectrum. So Village of Homer Glen wants to use 3000 or 2200. That's great. Not every LED is made the same. So this discussion saying spectrum will matter. You can't just put in a 5000 Kelvin light and use these numbers. It doesn't work that way. Because I just showed you what it takes to create a better visual experience for people. So I think in the future, this is my final slide, but in the future, I think we're gonna evolve to a better glare metric, and I think we're gonna evolve to a better spectrum metric. 3000 Kelvin is a nice way to discuss it today, but short wavelength is what we're all concerned about. It's what we're concerned about for our human health. It's what we're concerned about with dark sky modeling. And there is a relationship between the short wavelength blue content within the melanopic curve, which we see at night, versus the photopic curve. And so in our new standard, we're going to list both. We're gonna give recommendations for the CCT, which is the 3000 Kelvin or equivalent, but we're also going to give recommendations based on short wavelength content. So spectrum matters. So the neat thing about the new table is that there's a lot of innovative things in there, and it will evolve over time, but it's going to give lighting designers, landscape architects, city planners a whole new set of tools to really be able to help generate quality lighting in their outdoor space. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Rick. And we'll go ahead and stop sharing just to let everyone see each other for a minute here. We've gotten a few questions in. Again, I think great panel, really showed us the spectrum, sorry, playing off your presentation, of perspectives on this topic. A couple came in kind of building off of Vijay's content initially. Just thinking as planners, and you touched on this, talking about lighting zones, oftentimes we're starting at that zoning kind of base and moving up from there. And one of the questions was, in our community, we regulate lighting in residential zoning districts as well. How does Homer Glen regulate lighting in residential districts? It's kind of an administrative nightmare, and curious if there are any suggestions on how to best regulate to help keep dark sky, but not make residents get approval for every single light they need to put on their property. And again, Vijay, if you want to start the ball, but again, anyone please jump in if you got experience with this issue.
Yeah, certainly. I think our focus is more on commercial properties. in residential properties are very kind of limited to architectural, landscaping, lighting only. So it's very limited. And if you look up our code, there's a very small section on residential lighting. So it's like I said, it's very limited, and the focus is more on trying to limit the lighting on commercial properties.
I could chime in a little bit too on that. I have some experience in landscape lighting, being a landscape designer in my previous life. One of the things a lot of municipalities out in Arizona, they would restrict the residential aspect of lighting to minimizing glare or to conceal the source of the light. So as long as an adjacent property can't see the source of the light, meaning it's not shining at their property, that's pretty much where they stop there, because that's really where the problems occur is glare. You know, overall lumens, it's gets a little harder to manage that, but you could have a kind of a blanket, you know, statement, square footage, overall lumens, but low voltage lighting is pretty minimal anyway. It's my 2 cents.
All right. And then we've got a couple more questions coming in. Again, pivoting to Vijay first here. Kind of what's the level of awareness of Homer Glen residents to these lighting regulations and the intent behind them? Has there been really sufficient community buy-in in this? What was the source of going dark sky to begin with?
This goes back to 2011. Of course, I wasn't here. I know one of our trustees in the audience, so I think I don't know the full history of it. I mean, I think it's one of the founding values of Homer Glen, trying to be very distinctive, very pro-environment. And the Homer Glen, by the way, was incorporated in 2001 from Homer Township area. So it's a very young community and had a very distinct, vision when they incorporated, and outdoor lighting. And also, we also have conservation subdivision ordinance, and those were some of the ordinances kind of reflected the values at the time of the new community. So it basically came out as a new community with new goals that included the outdoor lighting, conservation subdivisions, and so on. So the residents are well informed, and as well as our business. Well, our concern was the businesses weren't so well informed. So we did a letter campaign to all the business owners I think about 6 months ago. And we also, do friendly reminders in the business license, renewals. So we try to keep up with the businesses, but it's kind of harder to kind of keep businesses in line compared to informing the residential community, which we do through newsletters. And, that's one of our ways of communicating with the residents.
And yeah, I mean, Rick, you put up the example, it looked like in Plymouth, they had the zonal lighting. I mean, that has to come from somewhere, right? And I don't know what experience you guys have on the design side with community engagement around lighting and support for these initiatives.
We've seen in Denver and New York City where you have to get not only city leaders involved, but usually police, first responders, kind of a community effort to take them out to a space and show them a space at a light level and walk it and actually say, can you do your job in this environment? This is what we're looking at doing.
And kind of keeping with the kind of light manufacturing, it says, this comment says, light manufacturers can be slow to respond. How long before a manufacturer is able to operationalize the new IES standards for these products?
Drew and I can probably both comment on that. Drew, do you want to go first, or?
You're muted, Drew.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. Yeah, so we're our engineers are working their tails off. We can be slow to respond, but I think it has more to do with the rapidly evolving technology of LED. We can be done with getting one catalog of products updated And in that amount of time, the technology is already improved and we've got to start over. So I mean, there's some products we're already on Gen 4, Gen 5, and so it's not that manufacturers are slow, it's just that the technology is evolving so quickly. But we certainly do try to, create a targeted strategic approach to the more popular fixture categories for certain applications and make those available to our designers.
I would add, I think the adoption rate is multi-level. The bug rating is a good example. Bug rating's been around for at least a decade. Manufacturers were probably the first ones to start listing it, but then you need the design community to embrace that and actually start using it. So everything that we're talking about now with glare metrics and spectrum, those are, couple-year-old concepts, and we're getting it out to the design community to care about those things. And as soon as they do, then the manufacturers follow suit. I mean, manufacturers want to win orders, and they'll do what the design community is asking for.
So it becomes kind of an iterative process. Kind of everyone's growing with the process. Right? And then I got a special request from Andy Cross in Highland Park. He said he had a question he wanted to ask verbally. So Andy, I'm gonna say keep it clean, but
thanks, will do. I'll try to watch my mouth. Gents, we have regulations for bug ratings in our code, and we find them ourselves as planners explaining them a lot. Everybody has an idea of what glare is. Driving down the highway, a sun's in somebody's windshield, you say, isn't that glare awful? But how can we help explain the concept of glare when it comes to lighting regulations for John Q. Public?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this all day long. So first of all, the IES has formed a new committee called the Dark Adapted Glare Committee. In Europe, they have a glare metric that is a bit more advanced than our G in the bug. It's basically given the black background of night and the brightness of the light source that's within a certain aperture size, what kind of scatter does that create in your eye? So having the letter G in the table is a very proactive forward move for the IES to say the light recommended is going to be based on that G level, meaning if you're going to use a high glare fixture, you're going to have to light the entire area up because your adaptation level is going to go high. If you can use a lower G rated fixture, you can use lower light levels, which saves on energy, light pollution, all good things, right? So the best way that we found to explain it, Drew Carhart showed an image. I frequently show an image where if you can prevent glare from entering someone's eye, you can usually create a better visual scene. And so that image usually speaks 1,000 words,
Yeah, the person hiding in the glare behind by the street light, right? I mean,
yep.
As a just a adjunct to that, and a couple of the other comments like that Rick already made, what I've certainly found in talking with people in communities, especially what we tend to, in my group, we tend to have people who are either in management or just citizens of a community who say, can you come and explain this to other people? We find nothing is close to being as effective as getting people out. I always tell people, take your town council or something on a nighttime tour, because you can find good lighting and bad lighting anywhere. You don't have to go very far if you're in a populated area where you can demonstrate. And there's nothing you can put on a screen or on paper or whatever. You can't simulate glare on a computer monitor because your monitor isn't capable of putting out the brightness of the surface of the sun, into your eye or something like that. But boy, if you can get people out and actually show them what this fixture does as opposed to that fixture, or this design in this area versus that, it speaks 1,000 words for sure.
And I know we can't exactly replicate it, but that does beg the question. I mean, are there like photo inventories or libraries available to kind of show people best practice and before and after of different standards? I mean, Rick, you had a couple examples where you showed the transition using even the same fixtures it looked like, but I know like we've got visualizing density as this kind of go-to as planners for talking about how things look when you build them. Is there something like that for lighting?
I would say there's a couple places for it. One would be the IES documents. So in those documents I referenced, we put a bunch of imagery in there because we felt as though we wanted it to read more like a neat book than a lighting guideline. So imagery is wonderful. I'm sure Drew Tedford can back me up on this, but Jennifer Woods has access to all the images that Landscape Forms has and takes, and she'd be happy to share images with you. I'm sure Sternberg would do the same. So if the manufacturer doesn't have it, the IES probably does.
That's true. There's a plethora of images out there, but I'll follow up to a couple of the comments that Rick have made and Drew Carhart. And I don't know if Vijay, if you guys did any kind of mock-up prior to your development, but I think mock-ups, seeing it in live, doing a corner, or I know it's hard. Rick, you said you can't do different zonals in a block area, but if you could pick sites where there's some mock-up areas, and especially with control being wireless now, you can show how you could dim a fixture and leave it up for a couple of weeks. One corner is good lighting, another corner is bad lighting. That's a great way to do that as well, Andy. So
yeah, if I may, so we did have test lights for the discussion.
Sorry.
Yeah, so just following up in your comment, Drew. So the staff did put up test lights for the case going to the village board tomorrow night. So we kind of picked the community park behind the village hall and the typical subdivision. And we installed 2200K LED lights and also PC amber lights ranging from 40 watts to 100 watts. So we actually did the actual light test lights installed to be seen at nighttime.
And that kind of takes me to another question kind of related to maybe wider installations. There's a question about kind of the technology available. It sounds like there's really technology exists today to light up streets and sidewalks in residential areas and make them a lot safer for pedestrians and cyclists to navigate, and still shield brighter lighting from homes. Is that right? And I guess building off of that, have you seen any maybe district-wide or neighborhood-wide installations for public lighting like this, other than just kind of the usual Cobra head streetlights?
I absolutely have for pedestrian spaces, but I haven't in residential, and I think it goes back to that 20-year infrastructure cycle. Energy costs a lot of money, and ultimately, who were the lights for? So much of the lighting is roadway lighting, and it serves two purposes. One is it's usually where there's an intersection and a supposed conflict, and everyone just thinks, well, that lighting's there, so people might as well use it. And so that old infrastructure, no one really wanted to pay the energy bill. So in the residential communities, they've probably been underserved for quality pedestrian lighting, people, a walking neighborhood. So I haven't really seen too much of that yet, but I've absolutely, in the urban environment, I've seen a shift where if you think about the whole conversation with autonomous vehicles, there's a point where, cars already have headlamps on them, right? If they drive themselves, you're not putting up street lighting for the benefit of cars. So, it's on a case-by-case basis. I love the hierarchy of the design process, which is what does that part of the community want to be architecturally, design-wise, what fits, and then from there, what are you doing for people? Lighting is for people. So can they orient, wayfind, feel confident, avoid, physical hazards, and then create an atmosphere and enjoy it.
Great, and we've got we're running a little long here, but we've got 2 more questions. It looks like that'll come in, and then we'll wrap up. This one I hadn't thought about. Has there been any discussion about how to protect insect health in populations? I think especially when we're talking about pollinators and things like that, that's become top of mind for some folks. So I don't know how that applies to technology, if that's part of the discussion at all.
I think that's why you asked the first question, do we need light? If you're in lighting zone 0 and you don't need light, that's great for the ecosystem. If you need some light, if you can use the right spectrum or use controls, you're doing the right thing. Drew Carhart, you probably have a perspective on that.
Well, unfortunately, nature gets really complicated in that, there's thousands of species of things within a mile of any of us, or where we're sitting now. And really the amount of actual research that's been done on particular species is pretty minimal as far as nighttime light, artificial light pollution, however you want to word it is. And what you kind of find is that everybody's a little different. So there isn't a magic something or other. It's even when you get to like birds and communication towers, what kind of light you're going to put on them to not attract birds at night. It isn't the same for every species. So it gets really complex. And I hope I never try to give across the impression, which it would be false, that I'm a conservationist that thinks we shouldn't use artificial light at night, because we obviously need artificial light at night. But from nature's point of view, any man-made light at night is light pollution. So it is a complicated issue. And the old yellow porch lamps we used to have were a painted incandescent bulb. They were supposed to keep mosquitoes from gathering at your house. Well, mosquitoes aren't that attracted to light anyway, so that didn't do much good. But there isn't a one-size-fits-all. What it basically comes down to, as far as we can tell with the amount of actual research that's been done, trying to minimize stray light is the top level thing. I work in a museum and I collect insects for the museum, and we use ultraviolet light at night to attract insects. And nobody actually knows why insects are attracted to ultraviolet light. There aren't any natural ultraviolet light sources at night, but we don't know why bugs are so attracted to it. So it's really a complicated thing. And it looks like maybe blue heavy light is more attractive to moths, but maybe not to beetles. It's really, so yeah, the best we can do from the environmental point of view is to minimize how far light carries. That's where the horizontal can be as bad as the uplighting, because it can attract things from miles away. And to keep the levels down, as much as possible.
All right, and then I think we'll end with this last question. Any suggestions how to explain to elected officials that improved visual efficacy you get with LED broad spectrum lighting, which can appear like increased lighting, quote unquote, really can use less output lumens? So just kind of, again, getting back to education and trying to actually get these newer technologies used.
So I can start with the COMET energy efficiency program. I think we had a workshop with our village board, and the program is more focused on decreased energy consumption and reduced maintenance costs. And at the same time, it maintains the safety through enhanced visibility and so on. So we kind of started with that program. That's what we got into discussing the spectrum for the street lights, the current street lights. So I think we're trying to give all the options to the village board, trying to be energy efficient and with enhanced visibility and safety at the same time, so they can make the informed decision. So we kind of use the COMET energy efficiency program as a guide.
Yeah, those some of those efficacy, it really depends on the application or the zone. I mean, if you think of efficiency, you're talking about, like Vijay said, the amount of light and with the least amount of energy. And sometimes you want less light in a zone, a particular zone, which it might not be as efficient in that regard because the lumen output will reduce, but the wattage might not reduce that much. But it's a balance. It's depending on, I mean, obviously streetscapes and commercial areas. I mean, you can really convert those areas into higher efficiency. But once you get into the smaller applications, but there's an answer for all of it.
All right. Well, looks like that's the end of the questions that have come through. I know we're about 20 minutes long here, so I just really want to say thank you again to our presenters, Vijay and Drew, Rick and Drew T. Really appreciate your time, not just today, but in preparing for this and offering up your time to educate folks on this really important topic. We will do what we can to get materials available to folks, but I know you can get CM credits through the APA site if you're looking to log those. The link was posted in the chat, and then you need to email ASLA, and I think Amanda put the email there, education.ilasla@gmail, if you want to get your CEU credits. So with that, again, thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time, and I thought this is really, really informative. Appreciate it very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, take care.